Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. We'll wait a few minutes whilst more people come in. So thanks for joining us today. It's really exciting to see so many people hop in on here. So we'll probably wait a couple of minutes. But yeah, make yourself comfortable for now. Grab a coffee or some water, and we'll get started soon. Okay, we've got sort of people trickling in a bit more slowly now. So I might start with a bit of an introduction. So hi everyone, my name is Dawood Potgieter, and I'm the Director for Programs in Discovery Science at Templeton World Charity Foundation. I'll just share my screen here, and I can tell you a bit about the foundation and what we do. So we are a private foundation based in Nassau in the Bahamas, which is where our founder, Sir John Templeton, lived and worked for 40 years. We are interested in a range of research projects, but it includes a reasonable amount of scientific research. In this case, a research on consciousness. We have a whole portfolio on consciousness called Accelerating Research on Consciousness. I'll hop into a quick slide to just tell you about sort of ourselves, how we work. We see these as our core values, trying to seek a global perspective. We fund research globally, and we're very keen to expand a global presence. We like to embrace differences, look for new ideas, different ideas. So John Templeton had an emphasis on making spiritual progress possible. We sort of define that as elements of human life that involve concepts like meaning, purpose, truth, and think that these concepts are central for progress. Obviously, we like to promote breakthrough discovery. That's what a lot of this research is all about. We think like a startup, and in sort of what that means to us is we like to cultivate bold and ambitious thinking, minimize bureaucracy, do new things, and you'll see today, in fact, that some of what will be covered is actually a reasonably new way of sourcing applications. And of course, we want to create positive impact for people. That's what it's all about. So I'm going to be talking for probably sort of 40 minutes or so, something like that. If you have any questions, then please use the Q&A section. I will get to those. I'm not very good at monitoring these things. I have a slightly short attention span. So I'm going to focus on the presentation. But please throw questions in the Q&A. If I spot them, I'll answer them immediately. If I don't spot them immediately, I'll answer them towards the end. So let's quickly jump on to talking about the Accelerating Research on Consciousness initiative. It's a $30 million initiative that was launched in 2018. Most of our projects in that space are adversarial collaboration projects. This is different. We don't require adversarial collaboration here. So I just mentioned that because some people know this initiative for that component. What we're talking about today is an open request for proposals. Anyone can apply if you have a job at a legitimate research organization and you have the skills and the equipment, then you can apply. And our goal here is essentially to fund a broader range of research projects in the field. We expect to fund up to 15 or so projects. I just pulled this snippet from our website, so it might look familiar. And essentially, we expect the grant amounts to be around $200,000. So probably sort of pilot study type projects, or a range of sort of discrete research questions. I'm going to tell you about what we're looking for today, then I'll tell you a bit about what we're not looking for, and then we'll talk about the process, and I'll walk you through the application process. So things that we're looking for include projects that are rooted in a broad understanding of the current academic literature on consciousness. We want to promote novel ideas, so we encourage applicants to integrate or contrast more than one tool, method, or theoretical approach. Of course, there are many ways to bring in novel ideas, but this is sort of one that's a useful framework to start with. We want at least some of the project funds to contribute towards scientific research that could lead to new evidence in the field. Each project description must feature a key experimental research question. That is not to exclude heavy conceptual work. It's not to exclude philosophy. We embrace projects that have strong conceptual components to them, but we would like there to be at least one key research question. We encourage applicants to contextualize their research questions within a rigorous conceptual framework, and a clear operating definition of consciousness should be included in the project description and should be consistent throughout. We don't have strong views on what the definition of consciousness should be, as long as it's one that's considered reasonably robust in the field. So we're not siding with sort of one theory or another theory. You can pick the definition that works in your area of research, but we would like that to be clear, and we want that to be consistent. So again, we're looking for projects that answer at least one research question, but we would like a sort of a reasonably strong conceptual framework. Open science is very important to us, so all finalists would have to pre-register their project description on the Open Science Framework. And by submitting a proposal, we sort of assume that you agree to do this as required. You don't have to pre-register before you submit your proposal. There will be a period towards the end where the people who, so the finalists would be required to pre-register, but obviously we want to tell you about it now because applicants should be prepared to do that. I'll talk a bit more about the pre-registration process later, but we are flexible in terms of essentially what kinds of pre-registration can be done. So some people think pre-registration is all about you can only have sort of a disconfirmation of a hypothesis. That's the only thing pre-registration is for. We actually allow broader than that. So you can pre-register even something that's more sort of exploratory research. That's okay as well. And finally, as a practical requirement, we want applicants to exclude names and affiliations from the project description document. So obviously, we need your names in the rest of the proposal, but the project description document, we want to keep anonymous to the greatest extent possible, because we hope for the external review process to be double-blind. So that is to say, we want the external reviewers to read the project description without knowing who wrote it. Sadly, we might not be able to anonymize all the documents ourselves. Anonymizing a large number of PDFs is sort of impractical. So we have this as a requirement. We might screen those documents for eligibility. And if it's not anonymized, then you might not be eligible. But we ask that as one of the requirements. By the way, quick side note, everything I have said here, everything that's written here is also available on our website. And this call will be recorded. So if you feel like you've missed anything, you had to quickly run out to get another cup of coffee, and you want to catch up, much of the information here is written on the website, and you can watch the recording later. So let's quickly talk about what we're not looking for. We are not necessarily looking for adversarial collaborations. I kind of mentioned this because our initiative in this field is known for adversarial collaboration. Of course, we're not trying to exclude adversarial collaborations. If you can come up with an adversarial collaboration in this context, and it sort of satisfies all the other criteria, that you're very welcome to do that. But that kind of approach wouldn't make you any more likely to be accepted for funding. Wouldn't make you any less likely, but it wouldn't make you any more likely. So don't feel like you have to go out of your way to sort of meet that requirement. We're also not really looking for ideas that lack a conceptual and experimental basis established in peer review literature. As a foundation, we often love to fund exploratory research, risky research, but in this case, we have as a minimum requirement, whatever is submitted needs to have some kind of strong conceptual and experimental basis from peer-reviewed literature. We also sadly cannot fund research that have no relevance to big questions about consciousness. So the research questions here have to be about the nature of consciousness to help us better understand consciousness. It can't be, for example, research to just treat some kind of disorder where that disorder might relate to consciousness. So it can't be a couple of steps removed from consciousness. The research itself has to be about consciousness. So some forms of biomedical research, some kinds of psychiatric mental health research, unless if the findings will tell us something about consciousness, that might not be eligible. And of course, I'm told I have to say this. We need some kind of research in here. As I mentioned earlier, we're very keen on to fund projects in philosophy and other areas. In this case, there must be some scientific research question and some scientific research, but of course, doing something to collaborate with philosophers or scholars in other areas is completely acceptable, providing there's some kind of research question. So let me tell you now about the RFP process, what's going to happen, and I'll give you a quick overview. We have sort of 4 steps as we see our process, and I'll give you an overview of those 4 steps, and then I'll go into each one in detail. So first of all, we have what I call stage 1. That's now. We have issued a request for ideas, and hopefully many of you as applicants will be completing proposals. We'll be going to stage 2 once the proposals are completed. There'll be an internal review and a completeness check, and I'll explain a bit later what that involves. After that, we have stage 3, which is the external review, and also a partial lottery. Some of you might not be familiar with this, but many of you might be. I'll explain a bit about what a partial lottery is. It's essentially a down selection step with an element of randomization. I'll talk a bit about that and why we think it's a good thing to do in this case. And then there's stage 4, which would be for the finalists, where they would be required to pre-register their project description, and of course where a funding decision, final funding decision would be made. Something to mention here is the sort of stage 1, 2, and 3 are all about a competition of sorts. Once we get to stage 4, the competitive part is over, and so by the time you get to stage 4 to pre-registering, we would have enough budget to cover all the projects in stage 4, and so it's no longer really a competitive process. We still need to get to a funding decision, it's not guaranteed, but it's no longer competitive. So stage 1, let's talk about the application process. If you have been to our website, you would find a link on how to apply, and many of you may have seen this. You click on the link, it asks you to register. Just pop in an email and password there. That will take you to a home page, and I'm just, by the way, I'm sure everyone on this call can navigate these things very easily, but I figured I would go through it very quickly just to make it more familiar. So you go to the home page. They've got these sort of 3 funny boxes. One at the top is your profile, so you just fill out various things there. The one at the bottom here, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but sort of the full proposal form, that is where you would add your proposal. You can see there's a bit of a box here. You can apply for more than one project. Obviously, we would discourage people from just throwing as many proposals in as possible. I'm sure we'll spot that. But if you have two great ideas, we're not going to force you to choose between them. You are allowed to submit two applications. So then these are the sort of main parts of an application. I'm not going to go through all of them. Some of them are self-explanatory, but I am going to go through two that I think require just a bit of explanation that might be helpful. So, you've got description and budget, outputs, outcomes, organizations, and team members. The bottom four, well, I mean, let's say the bottom two, organizations and team members, are sort of mainly administrative. The outcomes and outputs essentially follow from your project description and the budget. And then the main one, the one at the top, is really where the majority of the work is going to be. And what I'll do now is I'll walk you through some suggestions, some of the requirements to do with the project description. Again, these are written there. I'll just kind of talk about them a bit. And then also the budget, because those are normally the two kinds of things where people have the most questions. So on the project description, first thing to mention here is that this is the only part of the proposal that will be sent to external reviewers. So we wanted to include a range of things, sort of, like hypothesis and aims, significance, background, research strategy. Of course, it should also include a detailed research plan, explanation of what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, all the kinds of things that you would normally place in a pre-registration. But this is essentially the documents that the external reviewers will see. And I'll in the review stage, I'll tell you what questions they'll be asked and how they'll be asked to score it. So and that information is on our website as well. So something I'd recommend when you write this, of course, look at the instructions, but you can also go on our website to get a sense of how the reviewers will be asked to score this document, to for you to give yourself the best possible chance of getting a good score. We have some other guidance and criteria. Obviously, if you cite your previous work, please avoid phrasing it as your own work. Again, we are not going to ask reviewers questions like how successful is this person's previous work. That's just not going to be a question. So if you have published a lot and you're very productive, great. That just won't be something that's part of the scoring criteria here. So you can refer to your previous work, but if it's if the project description isn't anonymized, you might not be eligible to proceed to the next stage. Other things we encourage people to do is to define technical terms, explain them when they first occur. I think if the terms that are generally accepted in neuroscience and psychology, it's probably fine. But if it's in your subfield, it would be important to try and explain it. I know consciousness in particular is a topic that's studied by so many disciplines, and there's a lot of cross-disciplinary work that sometimes something that seems obvious to you simply might not be to a reviewer. So that's important to add. And then the expected lengths, we think would be about 2,000 words. You can go to 3,000 words. This is not necessarily a massive restriction. So if it's 3,001, it's probably fine. But what we did want is people to sort of write 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 words. That's probably going to make the reviewer's life more difficult. And we think with the level of information required here, 2,000 words is a realistic target, or even less if you can explain it that well. So moving on to the budget, and by the way, just a reminder, if anybody has questions, you can use the Q&A section at any time. So I see no questions so far, which either means I've explained this well or it's very boring. I'm happy with either. So let's continue and see. I mentioned the budget here. Most kind of grant applications have a very complicated budget. In this case, we tried very hard to make it simple. If you apply, what would happen is there's essentially an Excel spreadsheet that you download. The spreadsheet has several tabs, and the one that's the most important is sort of where I've got the screenshot here, where we have 6 budget categories. One's for the project personnel, classroom or teaching, which, by the way, that's sort of an administrative requirement for all of our grants. So it's fine for that to be 0, and it's fine for much of this to be 0. These are administrative requirements. So operational research costs, that's possibly where a lot of the costs will go. Different kinds of travel and lodging. Again, that distinction is because of our sort of internal administrative requirements. And then others, costs that are not included here. What you can do is just write a sort of a narrative explanation in that line, and then say how much you would request. This box extends sort of beyond the page. I've pasted something in here. So there's also a narrative about additional funding and how much additional funding you can secure. Depending on the amounts, there will be there may be some requirements to show evidence for it, but everything is explained there in the document. So yeah, this is essentially an overview of our budget. So if your administrators want to know whether the budget is complex or simple, hopefully this is a simple enough kind of budget to make this application as straightforward as possible. Let's hop to stage 2. So I've talked about general application mechanics, important parts of the project description and the budget. So let me tell you a bit about what we will do when we receive those applications. First of all, we'll make sure that the profile is completed so we can correspond with you. We'll look at the project description and budget sections. We want to make sure they're completed, they're attached. We'll screen the project descriptions to make sure there isn't a lot of that they've been anonymized. We expect at least 1 entry in the output section, outcome section, and organizations section. Really, I'm telling you this because you won't be able to submit the application unless you have that. So if it weren't it, you submit, and there's sort of some red boxes, then that would be why. And of course, we want at least 1 entry for the team members with a CV attached as required. We need all the related entries and supporting materials. The ones I've just mentioned really are the main ones. So that should be sort of broadly self-explanatory. And the last one, not to be sort of silly here, but our portal is a bit pedantic, and with some of these things, there's always one last button that you've got to check, and there's one last button you've got to click, and before you click it, you've got to check a box or something like that. What I would like from an application portal is it just sends it off when you're done. But this will require you to go through all of your areas and sort of click that you're done with them, and then at the bottom it would ask you to click that you're done with everything and then send it off. You get an email, a confirmation email when it's completed. So be on the lookout for that. But yeah, absolutely, when you're done, make sure you've sort of clicked those last buttons. It won't automatically submit. So once you've applied, we've gone through the internal review. We'll send things out for external review. As I mentioned earlier, the study design and objectives. As I mentioned earlier, the project description is going to be the thing that is sent to the external reviewers. The study design and objectives section are going to be weighted more heavily than the background and significance. But essentially, those would be the 3 areas that the reviewers would be asked to report on. we're asking the reviewers to give a score on a Likert scale, and they will have an opportunity to comment, but they wouldn't be required to comment. And I'll explain in a bit of what we would use the comments for. If they've comments and you're one of the finalists, you would be allowed to see the comments so you can improve your proposal, sort of have a last chance at it. But really, much of the decisions would be made on the scores. So, we have scoring guidelines where for each criteria would be scored on a scale. And oh, sorry, this last sentence is a repetition. I should have removed that. Now, once we get the external review scores, we're going to use what's called a partial lottery. Essentially, what that means is we take the external review scores. Proposals with a score below the median are rejected, and proposals with a score above the median are randomly selected. Now, that kind of sounds a bit like rolling the dice. We believe it's not. And there's some sort of interesting publications on this. One notable by Carl Bergstrom and Kevin Gross, doing sort of modeling on this. And essentially, our assumption here is that the external review process is not 100% accurate. It doesn't give you a completely accurate indication of the likelihood of success and the extent of success of a project. So we recognize that there's a lot of uncertainty with the external reviews, and we use them as a guide. But in this case, we want to essentially account for that uncertainty. Of course, some people are very good at writing something in a way that appeals to a particular reviewer, but sometimes there's just a lot of variation in what reviewers think, and to try and make it less based on sort of the luck of the reviewers, we have brought in this process of random selection. A few other foundations have used it in the past. It hasn't been used very much. I know of a handful of examples, but we think this is an appropriate opportunity to use it. What does that mean for you as a potential applicant? First of all, your likelihood of being funded is not necessarily any different. There's the same amount of proposals, same amount of money. In terms of, I mean, if you're somebody who's normally very good at charming reviewers, then the likelihood might be less. But if there are projects that are truly amazingly outstanding, we could still kind of pick them out and fund them. But our default position would be not to do that. It would be to allow for this process. But practically speaking, for you, it means that you want your proposal score to be above the median. Hopefully, that sort of reduces the pressure to write what you think reviewers want to hear, and it frees you up to write what you really think is the best study. We hope that this would also encourage applicants to pitch those ideas that might be a bit more risky, the ones they really want to do, but might otherwise be a bit worried to pitch to a review committee because it might not get in the top 10%, but it could get in the top 50%. So we also hope this would be a process to allow people to pitch to us ideas that might be a bit more risky, a bit more adventurous, and kind of as an applicant, follow the thing that you want to do rather than having to write an idea that you think would sort of charm the reviewers to get you in that top 10%. So and I'm happy to also kind of answer more questions about this, as it's quite a new way of doing down selection. Stage 4, as I mentioned, would be for the finalists. So at this point, everybody who's been who goes to stage 4 would have a budget allocated for their project, so it's no longer competitive. At this point, we would require people to pre-register. We would recommend the Open Science Framework, osf.io, and we can provide assistance at this stage as well. So if you've never pre-registered before, don't worry about it. We can help you out. But that would be a requirement, and something that we also think, if you pre-registered, your findings are as expected. It could give the community more confidence in your work, because you can very easily show that you haven't p-hacked, you haven't harked, you haven't done any of those other things. What you did is exactly as you predicted. So we also think pre-registration can be done for either hypothesis testing or exploratory research. Some people would do pre-registration only when they have a hypothesis to test. In this case, you can also do it if you maybe you have one hypothesis and you've got a few other elements of exploratory research you want to do. All of that could be included in the pre-registration. The pre-registration is essentially just an opportunity to differentiate between these things. So there will be an opportunity for people at this stage to get feedback from the reviewers. Some of you might ask whether proposals that are declined will get reviewer feedback. I haven't quite figured out how we would do that. If it's practically possible, then yes, we always want to be helpful if we can, but I don't yet know how to do that. So we would, I wouldn't be able to commit to that at this stage. And finally, for stage 4, the funding decisions will have to be made by the trustees of Templeton World Charity Foundation. So getting to stage 4 isn't automatically an approved project, but essentially, when it gets to stage 4, it means that the reviewers are convinced it's a good project. By that time, I'd have done my internal review, so me and my colleagues would be convinced that it's a good project. We expect the success rate there to be pretty high. Projects rarely fail when they get to this stage, but it's of course not 100% guaranteed. So I'll quickly go over the timeline, and then I think we can get into questions and answers. Or let me just do a few Q&A right now. So question on, what do you mean by key experimental project, or what is not regarded as experimental? So this is just a question on what is it, under what circumstances would we disqualify something because we think it's not experimental? An example there would be if it's just a conceptual analysis of consciousness. That's still very, very scholarly and important work, but and we fund philosophy projects quite often. We think they're important, but in this case, if it's just sort of philosophical analysis of work on consciousness and nothing is being tested, then we would consider that not experimental. I suppose one guide would be, are you going to collect and analyze some data? Next question here. Is there a minimum number of team members, and is it mandatory to be already affiliated with an organization at stage 1? So the answer is that there is not a minimum number of team members. So if you run a lab and you just want to do the experiments, N of 1 is fine. On being affiliated with an organization, I think that is a requirement. We are only able to give money to organizations. We're not able to give any money to individuals. So, and obviously, if we look at stage 1 and we can't see an organization, then that would be sort of part of our our compliance requirements that we wouldn't be able to satisfy. So if you're not currently at an organization, something I would suggest is find somebody who's willing to partner with you and see if maybe somebody could sponsor the project. but there needs to be an organizational affiliation. Oh, good question here on outputs and outcomes. So question here is, can you please give an example of output and outcome? The output is something that is produced by the project. So that could be a paper. And in this case, it's probably going to be at least one peer-reviewed manuscript. For outputs, we require them to be submitted for review. Obviously, you can't always control when they'll be published, but we need the manuscript to be completed and submitted. Other outputs that we're really enthusiastic about are open science related outputs. So this could be a data set. It could be a protocol. It could be a sort of a metadata template that you've prepared. It could be a preprint. So there could be a range of outputs. It's essentially things that you produce from your work. An outcome is essentially what you predict as the consequences of your output. So it might be that you expect a certain number of citations of a paper, or the data gets used a certain number of times, or expect a certain amount of engagement. Another outcome could be a particular advance in the field. So let's say there's a theory that you think you can disprove with your experiment. Then an outcome might be that it raises a lot more debate around that theory. So that's essentially the distinction. Is the output is the thing you create, the outcome is sort of what the downstream effects are. Another question here, can links to multimedia, presuming they're anonymized, be included in the project description? The answer is yes, you can include links, but we will not require external reviewers to view all the links, right? So if it's a link to a 3-hour seminar, for example, fine. And if the reviewer wants to follow that, that's okay. But I think all of the information that you want to give the reviewer a fair representation of your project should be written, or could be diagrams or something, but should be written in the text. I see you've got 2 more questions here. Let me go through the timeline, and then at least I can do the timeline before I run out of time. But I will get to your questions, I promise. And if there are any other questions in the meantime, just pop them in there, and I'll get to you as well. So today is the 8th of December. This is our first webinar. That's where we are on the timeline right now. The next point for us is a second webinar on January 18th. That will be a slight rehash of this, maybe for sort of latecomers to the process, but it would also be a more extensive Q&A session, for people with last-minute questions. Maybe by that time, you already have a sense of what you want to do. You just have some questions about the application form. Our submission deadline is the 28th of January. We will announce the finalists, or expect to announce the finalists. So this is sort of past stage 4 by March the 22nd. And we expect to announce the awards by the 6th of June. There's a bit of a gap there. And that's really just for our administrative work. We don't have much control over that, unfortunately. The earliest start date would be the 6th of August, sort of 2 months after the award date, and the project duration we expect is 12 to 24 months. And if you have any challenges, you want to contact someone, I'd recommend the email at the bottom, consciousness@templetonworldcharity.org. So that was my last slide. So what I'm going to do now is stop the screen share, and then I can more easily see all of you and the questions. So let's jump into these real quickly. So question here about would clinical trials on drugs that alter consciousness fit this call, or is it too clinical for this RFP? So I think if it's research that involves drugs to sort of essentially understand consciousness better, that might fit. If it's simply just like an efficacy trial or a safety trial or something like that, then no, that would not be eligible, because just knowing whether it, or knowing how well it works, or knowing whether it's dangerous, it might be hard to explain how that helps us understand consciousness. But maybe you can make the case. So, can think about that. So next question, is there a minimum or maximum duration of the project? Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we expect them to be 12 to 24 months. Absolute maximum, I think, for the amount here, I think 3 years would be pushing it. But and if you can justify it, you could ask for that, but I wouldn't necessarily go beyond 24 months. Again, if you want to go less than 12, fine, but that might be very ambitious. So a good question here on what qualifies as an organization. In this case, we would, so the background here is that we have sort of legal requirements and compliance requirements on who we can give money to and who we cannot give money to. So we can fund pretty much any country that's not been sanctioned, or that doesn't sort of have strategic deficiencies for money laundering and financing terrorism. Obviously, for those, it's just we have legal requirements, but and the same goes with organizations. So if it's an established organization with proper documents of incorporation, and it's a recognized legal entity in that country, that is what we would consider an organization. If it's a research organization, the definitions can be a bit more sort of fluid. What I would recommend is trying to go for an established university or an established research organization, and one that where we could easily do our due diligence on, and access the documents. If you're not sure, try it anyway. And if our compliance officer sees it and they need more information, they can actually contact you, and they will contact the organization as well, and do their due diligence that way. So question here about what does it mean by conceptual basis? So in a sense, what we want is for the word consciousness to mean to the applicant something like what it would mean to us, and something like a way that it could be used successfully. There are very few research areas where one has to have this requirement, but from my time in the field, I've seen so many explanations of consciousness, so many theories of consciousness, and some of them do have a very weak conceptual basis. They, you get issues like circular reasoning, or issues like just a very particular metaphysical commitment, and some metaphysical commitments are not really sort of that available for empirical research. So essentially what we would be looking for is something where the conceptual, sort of the assumptions around consciousness and the meaning of consciousness are ones that have been established in the academic literature, or that that align with that. And again, it's not every RFP that we have to have this requirement, but consciousness is such an adventurous topic with so many different views, and it's partly why we love it. It's just that without something with a strong conceptual basis, it's very hard for us to know that the money will have an impact. So next question here is, how much will the institutional grant administrators need to be involved in the submission process? This seems like a straightforward process. and that you could complete on your own. So the response is it really depends on your institution. I would recommend at the very least notifying your institution that you plan to apply, and you would need the sort of the contact details of the institutional grant administrator or contract signatory would need to be included in your application. And because if it's approved, we will reach out to them and we will negotiate the contract with them. So at a minimum, you need to make sure that that person would be satisfied when they receive our email. But aside from that, it really is mostly between you and your institution. We don't normally need to see a large number of other commitments. So next question on the latest start date. That's a good question. I did not include that. So the latest start date here is mostly dictated by our budget constraints. So we would really like the projects to start in 2022. So sort of within that period of 5 months. If there's a good reason to postpone beyond that, we can probably accommodate a couple of grants, but we wouldn't be able to accommodate all of them. So I think if you want to be on the safe side, start within 2022. Question about the reviewers. Who are the reviewers? So the reviewers have not yet been selected. We actually we've contracted this out to an organization called the American Institute for Biological Sciences. We have instructed them to find reviewers in this field with certain levels of expertise, and we are going to sort of very soon pull out data from our sort of the geographic distribution of our applicants, and we plan to instruct the reviewers. So we plan to instruct AIBS to find reviewers that are geographically distributed in a way that aligns with the applicant, so that we can get some sort of a better sense of who essentially, so that we didn't just have a bunch of American reviewers reviewing a global pool. But the answer is I don't yet know who the reviewers are. We've outsourced that. Question about whether grad students can apply as well. I think if you're a grad student, it would be difficult to make a case to be a sort of a project leader. If you're a grad student and you're interested in this, I would encourage you to go to your PI and have them, have the application go through them. I think we probably want someone with a PhD to do the research at least. So I don't know kind of when you would get to that point. But we certainly encourage young investigators to be ambitious for these things, providing they can meet all the criteria. So just gone through all the questions there. Let's go through the chat. Looks like there's a few things. We've got greetings from Canada. I've already talked about submitting more than one. Question about the whether the internal review process is also double blind. The answer is no, because that is actually where someone like me or my associate Virginia, who's also on this call, where we would have to decide whether someone is at an institution that is suitable, or whether somebody might be in a country that's sanctioned. So we would need information there about the person. But what you would know is the internal review isn't really a competitive down selection. It's really just to kind of get a sense of who meets the minimum criteria. Another question here on 15% of the budget being allocated to indirect costs. That's another good question. So the budget amount here is the maximum that can be requested is $230,000, and the maximum that can be requested as indirect costs is 15% of the direct costs. So what that would work out as, for most applications where institutions want to take the maximum amount, it would work out as $200,000 direct costs, and 15% of that, $30,000 indirect costs. That is flexible. So for example, if your institution is happy to take only 10% or 5% indirect costs, you can still apply for the full 230 and just have a bit more direct costs for the project. And if they're willing to give up all overhead, then you could apply for the full 230,000 for direct costs. So a question about continuing this kind of RFP in the future. Right now, this is a one-off process, so we don't know when we would do this again, or whether we can do it again. Question about whether one applicant can receive more than one award if they submit more than one proposal. That's a good question. I have not included any steps to prevent that. So the answer is yes. If you can do lots of really good proposals, then I mean, we may have to have a conversation about capacity. If you apply for 2 proposals and in both of them you say you commit 80% of your time, we may have to have a conversation about capacity there. As I mentioned earlier, we wouldn't expect to get a large number of proposals from every applicant, and I mean, maybe there are some people out there who can just churn out proposals and they're all good quality, but generally speaking, a large number of proposals lead to slightly poorer quality, and we would expect sort of 1, maybe 2. A question about the reviewers who have AIBS selected in the past. Well, we have never run this kind of RFP in the past, so I can't tell you who the reviewers were for past RFPs like this. For other ones, I don't remember who the reviewers were. I sort of normally look at their names, but I wouldn't be able to remember well enough to tell you. So we've gone through the presentation, we've gone through the Q&A, we've gone through the chat. I see there's 8 minutes left on the clock. We've got a few people have dropped off. It seems like we're kind of coming to the end of it. I'm very happy to give you, 7 or 8 minutes back on your day. Unless there are any other burning questions that pop up in the next sort of minute or so, I'll just say thank you for joining us. Thanks for considering this request for proposals. Good luck with your proposals if you choose to apply. We hope that this mechanism is reasonably easy and practical for you, and we really look forward to reading about your ideas. It's always fun to read those ideas, and yeah, no other questions again, so I'll just say thank you again for joining us, and I look forward to hopefully reading some of your ideas soon. Take care, everyone.